When Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and went to live in Capernaum, by the sea, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali, that what had been said through Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun and Naphtali, the way to the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sit in darkness have seen a great light. On those dwelling in a land overshadowed by death, light has arisen. From that time on, Jesus began to preach and say, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." As he was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, casting a net into the sea. They were fishermen. He said to them, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." At once they left their nets and followed him. He walked along from there and saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father, Zebedee, mending their nets. He called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. He went around all of Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and curing every disease and illness among the people. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, that was a pretty long gospel. So do you all want a long homily? I didn't think so. So I'm just going to really bring out two things. Okay? One is the Bible, and the other thing is this fish right here. Okay? These are the two things I want to bring out. Gospel story to me is like an onion. It's got many layers. And as you peel it, layer by layer, it gets stronger. Like that, a gospel story, when you go into different levels and peel back layers, you understand more and has deeper meaning for you. I want to focus on Jesus recruiting his disciples, his first disciples. One layer is just a nice story. This is how it happened. Walked along the sea, saw these fishermen, gathered them up. That's one layer, one level. But going another layer, peeling back a layer, what is that telling us? What is Jesus telling us about this? Well, a lot of times people will say this is about vocations. This is Jesus showing how he recruited his disciples and his vocations for the clergy and religious. And that's another way of looking at it. But the way I want to focus looking at it is a little bit deeper than that. What is Jesus saying to us now, to me and to you? What is Jesus saying by this story, by this example? A lot of times it helps when you're looking at a gospel story to see what went on before and what went on after. And what went on before this story in Matthew is the story of baptism. Jesus gets baptized by John the Baptist. And the Father indicates that he's very well pleased with that. The very next story after that, and before this one, is Jesus being tempted in the desert. And he's tempted in three ways. He's tempted by immediate comfort. If you're hungry, here's some bread. Satisfy yourself. No big thing. He says, no, that's not what this is about. He's tempted by power. He's brought up a precipice and said, you got the power. You know, God's got the power. Jump down. It's about power and pride. That's what he gets tempted by. And then the third temptation, you can call it wealth, materialism, consumerism. The devil shows him everything, the entire kingdom, and says, all this is yours, just worship me. He says, no, That's not what this is about. Then comes this story. And then what happens after this story of his walking along the seashore and saying, "Come follow me and I will make you fishers of men." What happens after this, from this point in Matthew until his passion and death, he lives among the people, he shows great compassion, and he ministers to all. Ministers in every way possible to all that he meets. Well, what does that tell us? What is Jesus telling us with this? Well, first of all, we all been baptized here? Have you been baptized? You've been baptized? And maybe I'll ask a group question. Have you all been tempted? Yeah? Not been tempted? And probably more ways than these three, or at least variations of these three ways that Jesus was tempted. So what does it mean when Jesus says, "Come after me, come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men"? I think what he's telling us is ministry. We are all obligated to be ministers. It's not just these disciples. You've been baptized, you've been tempted like Jesus, you've resisted temptation. Hopefully that's part of the reason you're here. You've resisted temptation. Maybe not perfectly like Jesus, but you've resisted temptation. The next step, like the next part of the story, the next step is for you to, for all of us to live an exemplary life and minister to all. That's what I think Jesus is telling us in this story. Now, here at St. Dominic Savio, you know, once a year we have the ministry fair, where people are to sign up for various ministries. And the most common complaint I hear from the heads of the ministry teams is, "I can't get enough volunteers." Well, usually my reply is, they're not volunteers. We're all recruits. We've all been baptized. We're recruited by Jesus. We're not volunteers. The only question left is, how will I serve? How will we serve? How will we serve? Well, Susan back there is an usher. Eucharistic minister. Visit the sick. There are many ways we can serve, but that's what we're called to do. That's what this gospel story tells us. Now, many of you here also have seen Diane and I over the years doing things together. So you shouldn't be surprised if I'm going to invite her up and have her peel back another layer and talk about what it means for us to be ministers, all of us to be ministers, from the cradle to the grave. Diane?
Well, Joe has been talking about the baptismal call to follow Jesus. And as he said, I'm going to offer my perspective from my viewpoint on the same gospel reading today, and another way of looking at discipleship and sacrifice. Just a few short weeks ago, it was Christmas. We celebrated Christmas with the baby Jesus in the manger. It was very cute, very comforting. There was shepherds, there was sheep, there was a holy night, the song, Silent Night. The Magi arrived with gifts. Everybody was happy at the joy of the newborn king. There were bright lights and decorations, and we gave each other gifts to emulate the wise men coming. Beyond marriage, yes, there was not a lot of talk about discipleship and sacrifice. There was a bright star and a prophecy fulfilled. And at the Epiphany, which means manifestation, Christ was manifest to us as a newborn king in the form of a human child. Now, fast forward to the circumstances leading up to today's gospel. As Joe so clearly pointed out, Jesus had been baptized, recognized by God, by John the Baptist, and confirmed by the Father himself. Jesus has been to the desert, and has been tempted, and has proven himself faithful to the Father's call. John the Baptist has been arrested now, we learn, by Herod, and Jesus' ministry is about to begin in earnest in Galilee, as prophesied in the Old Testament, which we also heard in the first reading today by Isaiah. Jesus calls out to Simon Peter and Andrew, fishing with their father, and then out to James and his brother John, also working with their father. He calls them to come with them and drop everything. They do it even though the Jewish custom in those days was not for the teacher, or the rabbi, to seek out his disciples, his followers, but rather for the followers to follow a teacher based on their perception of his reputation for learning and holiness. They do not seem to be looking for a teacher, at least not right at the moment, because they're fishing, they're with their families fishing. Yet, they agree to go at once. They must have been very impressed by the attractiveness of this teacher, and that now Christ is manifested to us as the fisher of men. Well, imagine the sacrifices involved in this type of action. First of all, I wonder how the fathers felt. I don't know how many siblings they had, how many, Simon, Peter, and Andrew, and James, and John. I don't know if they had siblings. But in any family, to have two sons leave at once when there's physical labor to be done must have been a big deal. I was wondering how the mothers felt. I've had 4 children go off to college, and it never got easier watching them walk out that front door. Even though I knew where they were going, I didn't know what circumstances they would find themselves in. I don't know if they were married, except that we do know Simon Peter was married, because in a future gospel story we know that Jesus cured his mother-in-law. So at least one of them was married. I wonder how their wives felt about this new venture. As I reflected on these real-life scenarios and placed myself in their shoes, I realized a couple of things. First, that the sacrifice of this call to discipleship affects more people than just ourselves, just the ones called, and makes the decision even more amazing and difficult. It makes especially the 4 apostles that we are studying today seem more amazing to me. And I also realized that Jesus' call was just not to follow him and listen to him, but it was to buy into his mission, to engage into his mission, which was to become fishers of men. The call of discipleship they received would ultimately lead to Calvary, the resurrection, Pentecost, and except for one apostle, to martyrdom, to their very lives being taken. This leaves me with a question for all of us today. What type of sacrifice are you, willing to make to be followers of Jesus? What sacrifices are we willing to put our families through, have our families make? I must admit, there are times when I would rather remain back at Christmas with all the serenity and cuteness of the infant Jesus in the manger swaddled against the cold night, not thinking about sacrifice and hardship. When the going gets tough, I'd rather be naive and innocent. But this is not what we're called upon to do. Isn't Jesus calling on us to make the hard decisions, the tough choices, when it's not socially popular or accepted? And isn't Jesus calling us to follow him to Calvary and beyond? We encounter this call to holiness through tough choices we make every day. When a coworker gossips, do we join in or do we stop the conversation? When a pro-abortion advocate speaks, do we advocate for life or change the topic? When we receive too much change back, do we immediately inform the cashier? It means not budging on my income taxes or going back to the store I inadvertently left with merchandise. It means giving up on parties and family events when ministry at the church calls. It means working for a lot less money or agreeing for my spouse to make less money because we're both answering God's call. What kind of follower of Jesus are you going to be? Are we going to remain with the infant Jesus in the manger? Or are we going to follow Jesus all the way to Calvary with all the sacrifice and hardship that might involve? The reward, of course, is not in Calvary, it's in the resurrection. By raising from the dead, Jesus has defeated death itself and opened the door to everlasting life for all of us. So maybe the question shouldn't be whether or not you want to stay in the manger, but if from the manger, can you see the resurrection? And can you, like Peter, James, and John, drop everything and come at once?